the Tesseract, a cube that promises to be an infinite source of energy. In addition, Nick Fury and his team see it as a tool that could help develop technologies to protect the Earth from extraterrestrial threats. The problem is that this cube is also an Infinity Stone, which a whole race of extraterrestrials are looking for. Well, actually, a bigger, badder villain is looking for them, but it's not time to introduce him yet. The Infinity Stones are a series of artifacts that, when brought together, grant the wielder absolute power over the universe. But for now, we won't go too deep into that. The point is that the leader of the Chitauri has just given Loki a scepter containing the Mind Stone, so that he can go steal the Tesseract, and, in the process, get revenge on his brother Thor by subjugating the Earth and its inhabitants to demonstrate the power he is capable of wielding. His mission is to steal the cube, and, with it, open a giant portal through which he can bring the entire Chitauri army from the cosmos to Earth and thus conquer it. With his new scepter, Loki opens a portal where he steals the Tesseract and controls the mind of Clint and a physicist who knows a lot about this artifact. Nick Fury and his team try to stop him, but no matter how hard they try, Loki manages to escape. Fury is aware that this is a gigantic threat to all of humanity, so he declares war. He knows it will not be an easy battle, so he gathers the most brilliant men and women for this mission. Among them are Clint, but for now, his mind is being controlled by Loki. Steve Rogers, also known as Captain America, Natasha Romanoff, known as Black Widow, Bruce Banner, better known as the Hulk, and finally, Tony Stark. The latter now has a solid and loving relationship with Pepper, and has also managed to build the most technologically advanced tower in the entire city, Stark Tower. It is also a monument to his name and legacy, which is clearly seen if we notice that it has his last name written in a giant, shining sign for everyone to see. Agent Coulson is looking for Tony, as he needs to inform him of what happened. Tony doesn't even want to go, but since Pepper is asking him to, and Agent Coulson really needs him, he accepts. Coulson is also a huge fan of Captain America. He even has collectible cards of him, but maintains his professional line and doesn't give it too much importance. Our heroes must hurry, as Loki has already set up a clandestine laboratory to get the Tesseract to provide enough energy to keep the large portal open, through which the alien army will enter to destroy the Earth. Everyone boards the helicarrier, and the search for Loki begins. Thanks to tracking systems, they realize where he is and send Captain America after him. The fierce battle begins, which Natasha and Tony Stark join, and with a single blow, Tony manages to stop Loki, something quite strange for such a powerful enemy. However, as they were about to take him to a more secure place for interrogation, Thor falls from the sky and takes his brother to try to talk to him and convince him to stop this revenge. At that moment, Iron Man appears and starts a battle against Thor, although it doesn't last long, as it is stopped by Steve. Once peace is made, they lock Loki in a maximum security cell on the ship, and Tony and Bruce study the scepter with the Mind Stone. The team gets to work and plans what to do to find the Tesseract. But this is when things start to get complicated. A strong tension between Steve and Tony begins to emerge due to their different ways of thinking and action plans. Tony sees Steve as an obedient and old-fashioned soldier, disconnected from modern reality. He believes Steve is too rigid and unwilling to question authority. On the other hand, Steve sees Tony as a selfish and arrogant millionaire who does not understand sacrifice and responsibility. He distrusts Tony's motivation and commitment to the common cause. The tension between them is so great that in a fit of anger, Steve tells Tony the following: "You only fight for yourself. Stop playing the hero," a phrase I want you to remember well because it will be very important. These tensions between them spread to the rest of the team. They insult each other, reveal personal things, and Tony does not stop making ironic jokes and putting himself above the rest of the Avengers and even above Nick Fury himself. As we have seen throughout this story, Tony has constant tendencies to challenge authority. Let's remember that he first challenged his own partner and the entire board of his company by closing the weapons department. Then he mocked the entire government by refusing to hand over his technology and stood up to the army. And now he is being arrogant towards Nick, the man who brought them all together to defend the Earth from an intergalactic threat. All thanks to the inflated image Tony has of himself. Karen Horney was a German psychoanalyst who theorized that neurosis is a defense strategy that people develop to manage anxiety and insecurity. One of the key concepts in her theory is the inflated self-image, where a person develops an exaggerated and grandiose perception of themselves as a defense mechanism against feelings of insecurity and fear. Some arrogant individuals with high levels of narcissism, like Stark, believe they have special rights and a superior status due to their self-image, and this behavior can manifest in the way they treat others and respond to authority figures. And now, if this inflated image comes from feelings of insecurity, where do these feelings come from? Well, it may be that, like many people, they come from the relationship with their parents. Howard Stark was often absent due to his work, which left Tony without a present father figure during much of his childhood, and this absence could have created an emotional void and a sense of abandonment. This lack of attention and validation could have made young Stark feel that there was something wrong with him, and that's why he was abandoned, which likely contributed to Tony's insecurities, who constantly strived to prove his worth. Now, as we saw in the film of Tony's father, he was demanding with the boy, It seems to me that Tony grew up trying to win his father's approval, but also developed a rebellious attitude from never feeling valued enough. This dynamic could have instilled in him an aversion to any figure who tries to exert authority over him. All this could partly explain his constant defiance of authority and the reason for his very, very inflated self-image, which he makes crystal clear when, as tensions continue to escalate, Captain America asks Tony, "Big man in a suit of armor, take that off. What are you?" Which is a direct attack on Tony as a person, to which Tony responds, "Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist," an egocentric response, inflating his image to cover his vulnerability. While all these discussions are happening, Natasha approaches Loki to interrogate him, and thanks to her skills, she manages to make him reveal his plan. Loki had wanted to be caught all along to put the Avengers in a situation of stress and conflict. Using his manipulative words and the influence of the Mind Stone, his goal was to set the Avengers against each other, causing distrust and internal fights. In addition, Loki knew that if he managed to enrage the Hulk, he could lose control and cause massive destruction inside the helicarrier, weakening the team and destabilizing their base of operations from within. This is represented by a shot in which the scepter with the gem goes from being on the table to being over the team, who cannot stop arguing, symbolizing that it now controls them. At that moment, Clint arrives, causing a strong explosion on the ship, which destroys a propeller and sows chaos. Bruce loses control, transforms into the Hulk, tries to kill Natasha, and destroys everything in his path. Meanwhile, Tony and Steve put their fights aside and join forces to repair the broken propeller and save the ship from crashing. At the same time, Loki manages to escape from the cage and locks Thor in his place. He then seriously injures poor Coulson and ejects Thor from the ship. Another one who also falls is the Hulk, who leaves the ship while trying to destroy a fighter jet. At the same time, Natasha manages to get Clint out of Loki's mental control. In the end, Stark manages to save the ship from falling into the abyss, although Loki ends up leaving havoc and escaping, thus beginning his plan to open the portal to bring the army that will conquer the entire planet. The wound Loki left on Coulson was devastating. Before dying, the agent resigns himself and exclaims, "This was never going to work if they didn't have something to..." And without being able to finish his sentence, he loses his life. It seems to me that if Coulson had had just one more second, he would have said, "If they didn't have something to avenge." Nick takes the boys' blood-stained collectible cards and throws them on the table, which hits Tony's and Steve's consciences hard. Nick comments that when he created the Avengers Initiative, he imagined bringing together a group of extraordinary people in the hope that together they would become something bigger than themselves and could fight united. Coulson died believing in that idea, in the idea of heroes. Upon hearing the word heroes, Tony gets up and leaves the room. At this point, Coulson's death changes everything, both for Tony and for the rest of the team. Tony has a personal connection with Coulson. He has been the link between Tony and SSHIELD, and although Tony often shows an indifferent or sarcastic attitude towards him, there is a respect and even affection for this noble agent. Now Coulson is dead, not directly because of Tony, but he does feel a certain degree of responsibility, as his own conflicts of arrogance and disagreements with the other Avengers in a way contributed to the tragedy. It's as if Tony, once again, is seeing the consequences of his actions very, very closely, just as when he saw the impact his weapons had in his own kidnapping. Until that moment, the team was fractured by their differences and personal conflicts, but the loss of Coulson has just ended this. Now they have something to avenge, but this goes beyond Coulson as an individual. At this moment, Coulson becomes a symbol. His death shows the Avengers that lives are at stake and that they must act together and decisively to protect the world. It's as if in Coulson, our heroes see the innocent lives reflected, and even more specifically in Tony's case, the person he loves, Pepper. In a moment, you will understand exactly why. With this new motivation, the heroes rise, take up arms, and go to stop Loki. On the other hand, Tony arrives at his big, shining tower, where Loki has already opened the portal, so the fierce battle begins. It is tough. There are material and human losses like never before. However, all the Avengers arrive and put their strength, sweat, and blood into stopping the Chitauri and saving as many human lives as they can, but now working and fighting side by side as a true team, one with a much greater objective than their individual interests, for something bigger than their mere existence as individuals. Although they manage to slow down the attack for a moment, it is useless if they don't close the portal, as hordes of enemies continue to pour out of it. At the moment, destroying it is not an option, as it has a pure energy shield that makes it impenetrable. The Hulk manages to give Loki a beating and knocks him out of combat. Meanwhile, Natasha reaches the physicist who created the device, who has finally come out of the trance. He reveals that by using Loki's scepter, she can close the portal, but before she does, Tony orders her to stop. That's because the Council has decided to send a nuclear bomb to the city to finish off the enemies, but this will also end the civilians. Tony doesn't want to close the portal because he has an idea. He has an extremely moving plan that tells us a lot about his transformation arc. to carry the atomic bomb on his own shoulders and send it into the portal to save the millions of human beings who inhabit the city and, in the process, destroy the Chitauri army. The problem is that this is very possibly a one-way trip. Tony takes the bomb, and before doing so, he calls the most important person in his life, Pepper. This act, as human as loving, is the clearest demonstration that Tony has changed. Erich Fromm, in his book The Art of Loving, states that the fundamental condition for the achievement of love is the overcoming of one's own narcissism. In the narcissistic orientation, we only consider real what we feel and think within ourselves. Things that happen outside of us have no reality in themselves. We only see them in terms of whether they are useful, dangerous, or what we can get from them. The opposite of narcissism is objectivity, which is the ability to see people and things as they really are. In this same vein, one of the characteristics of true love is the ability to give without expecting anything in return. This is only possible when we overcome our narcissism, which makes us focus on what we can get from the relationship. Initially, Tony was exclusively focused on himself and his own interests, but throughout his journey, and largely thanks to his relationship with Pepper and with those around him, he learns to value and love others for who they are. His last call is a demonstration of this. Tony calls Pepper not out of a selfish need or to ask for something, but because he truly loves her and wants to say goodbye. Tony doesn't sacrifice himself because he's going to receive something, but for love of Pepper and for love of others. The overcoming of one's own narcissism as something necessary for love, which in essence is giving without receiving anything in return, even if it means giving up his own life. Tony is about to enter the portal from which he doesn't know if he will return, and he uses his last seconds to hear Pepper's voice, but the person he loves most in the world doesn't answer. Finally, Tony enters the portal, leaves the atomic bomb among the enemy army, and it explodes, destroying the army at its root and all the soldiers. Tony, unconscious, falls from space back to the portal, which he fortunately manages to pass through before it closes, thus surviving. They have finally won the war. Remember when Steve told Tony, "You only fight for yourself. Stop playing the hero"? Well, there are many definitions of a hero, but if most of them converge on something, it is that, in essence, a hero is an individual who puts the well-being of others above their own. And it seems to me that now Tony has become one. For the safety of the planet, Thor takes the Tesseract to his world along with Loki, and each Avenger continues on their path. In the end, we see a shot of Tony's building, which no longer has the word Stark on it. Instead, only one letter remains, the A, the initial for Avengers, which is very symbolic. Initially, the building with the Stark name represented Tony's ego and legacy. It was a symbol of his individual identity and personal success. The last name in large, luminous letters was basically a representation of his ego. In this sense, the change from STIRK to A indicates that Tony has accepted that there are causes more important than himself. He is now part of a mission bigger than himself, protecting the world alongside other heroes. If you want to keep following the story, check out the next video.